Hey everyone, welcome to the Cycle World podcast. I'm here with Kevin Cameron. I'm Mark Hoyer. We are going to talk about the Suzuki GSX-R, I don't know, ultimate super sport legacy. Is it the soul of Suzuki? In a lot of ways, I think it became the soul of Suzuki on its launch. Maybe
Well,
not
it certainly did. Yes, absolutely. Because we don't,
1985. Yeah, go ahead.
yes, yes, we think of Suzuki and we think of GSX-R,
Yeah.
and that's just how it is. If their marketing people are pleased with that, hats off.
Well, I
But
mean, what a
that's how it
profound,
is.
yeah, but what a profound impact that motorcycle made, 85, 86. I was in peak, madness for motorcycles, kid, reading all the magazines and, cover of Cycle World. There's GSX-R and FC 750, Yamaha. And it was a little bit, we were playing with imagery at the time. So it was an 85 issue, and we had the GSX-R 750 and the FZ 750, and these were like the new super sports. We didn't have them in. There wasn't a comparison. It sort of implied that it might be by the images on the cover. Sorry,
Yes,
it's just how it is. It's a
just
newsstand. You
get
got to
them to
sell
buy
some.
it.
You got to sell something.
Yes.
But the GSX-R, I mean, it was so serious that it had a sponge holding the gauges up. It was so serious about lightweight, and it was so serious about performance. It had the low handlebars. It had the aluminum frame, aero oil cooled motor, zillions of close pitch fins that were just beautiful. But it just said no, lightweight is everything, and if you don't do
Yes.
something about it, everybody else, you're behind.
And of course, we know from reading about military aircraft that weight growth, the pressure for weight growth is constant. Oh, we've got to have this on there. Oh, look, this new system, we've been working on this 12 years. Where does it go? Uh, and before long, you have this ponderous hippopotamus, and you have to have a revolution. And that's what we've seen in the sport bike world, is that there are periodic resets. But I think this product was really carefully planned because there's Etsuo Yokouchi, who designed the X6. Anyone old enough to remember those alphanumerics?
The hustler.
And yes, and then and the RG500 race bike, which Barry Sheen took to two world championships. Anyway, Yokouchi said after they had done the big, heavy GS models, we're going to build a bike that's 20% lighter, that makes 100 horsepower and has a top speed of 146 miles per hour. Now, uh, basically, what he was saying was, we've learned a lot in racing, and we're going to use that to sell product. And how?
And
How
how,
they
yeah.
did sell it. Yes.
Well, I mean, at that time I was just a punk who'd go and hang around the Suzuki dealership. And
Yeah.
there was a sales guy there who was very tolerant of me, knowing, that I couldn't buy a bike. I didn't have a license, but I would go in and I just talk motorcycles. It was where you could go. And on the same showroom floor as a GSX-R 750 first year was a leftover GS 1150 ES, which was
Oh,
their great big tube frame, big bore steel tube frame.
yes.
It had like that bull door super giant fairing with the giant round headlight. I mean, it was beautiful. They had a red one and a blue one. They were beautiful, but as a you sort of would like the GS 1150 ES, but how could you ever choose that motorcycle when all the seriousness in the world was right there? Everything that you'd ever
Yes.
seen on a racetrack, and you're just like, I don't know how many people were just absolutely desperate to have it, and then how many people actually got it, and what a revolution in club racing.
Absolutely. Because all those people who were stopped from going racing by the steady, might call it civilizing of the motorcycle buying public. It used to be that you could get everything you wanted from Triumph to build a lovely 500 AMA race bike, and you had to know how to do it. and that stopped a lot of people. But GSX-R was part of the second phase of superbikes. The first phase were the big, heavy, air-cooled sit-ups with tube frames, and uh, the Japanese realized that they weren't raceable. You had to do a lot of things to the engine, you had to do a lot of things to the chassis, and that wasn't going anywhere with the general public because
Everything's raceable, Kevin. Come on.
well, everything is raceable, particularly, I mean, ridiculous extremes like stock foot peg RD350 racing,
Yeah.
with your hands up here.
Yeah, well, they hit them with the hammers. They just, yep, it's a
Yeah,
stock foot peg, but they smash them up
yes.
to get them out of the way.
So they realized that there was a place in the world for a motorcycle with that kind of performance, but which you could just buy. You didn't have to work it over. You didn't have to have the Tricor speed parts catalog and have a favorite machinist and a second machinist in your Rolodex. You could just ride this thing. That was the marvelous thing about the GSX-Rs. It was
Yeah.
ready to go properly. Now, what was done then? They started in to make an air-cooled 100 horsepower, under 400-pound motorcycle, and they got, as it says, to 97 horsepower. But one of the engineers, Chiaki Hirata, said, we made the power, but the spark plugs were full of aluminum. And I've seen that. It is so ugly. You unscrew the spark plug and there's this gray squash on the end of it. And it's like your heart sinks and you know you're going to be in the shop forever fixing this thing. So then they realized that we've what are we going to do? We're going to water cool this thing. We're budgeted. We want to hit this price. So there was another engineer, Masahisa Kamiya, who had some familiarity with wartime air-cooled aircraft engines, and he knew that 30% of their cooling came from internal oil circulation. So, and that included up in the rocker boxes to cool the valves. They were using that oil for all it was worth, and they used a lot of it. So what they did was they made this plan to get to the 100 horsepower level with air oil cooling. The engine was covered with fins, as you remarked, and the inside just had all this oil being pumped in all directions. Squirts that were going down onto the hot tops of the combustion chambers. And of course, that used to be why the Gilera 4s had their cylinders pointed forward, so the air could come between the cam boxes, down into those fins, and then up and over.
Well, that's why they spread the cams out as well, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Get that opening.
So these people were bringing in a lot of ideas. They were open to change, and they broke the back of the weight growth that had affected high-powered motorcycles. And for example, the other spear point of the second phase superbikes was Honda's 750 Interceptor. But there was mighty Todd Schuster stepping into the bare frame and pulling it up around him as if it were a pair of pants. And he said, in all the history of racing, there's only one frame heavier than this, the 1953 Hudson. A lot of people don't know that Hudson was big in NASCAR racing with a 300 cubic inch flathead, but that's an aside. Anyway, these are the roots of the GSX-R. Another mighty root of the GSX-R was the demonstrated fact that racing sold motorcycles, because in 79 and 80, Wes Cooley, the late lamented Wes Cooley Jr., won superbike championships on an air-cooled. And that didn't do them any harm. Win on Sunday. So I don't know that they had any idea how successful this would be, that one day there would be levels of GSX-R, something for everyone.
I think one
But
of the
that's where it went.
yeah, and probably an unintended positive consequence was the proliferation in club racing and so many clever people racing the same bike.
Absolutely.
It was massive, supportive R&D that would feed back and improve the motorcycle at the factory level because everyone was working on it.
It's called
And
hot rodding.
and the results, winning the race. The results are plain. We ought to look at that thing that you did to your GSX-R. I
Yes.
think, I never raced an early GSX-R. I've ridden virtually every GSX-R sort of since about 1995, 94. And one thing that struck me along that line from then to now is the broad target that bike can hit in terms of setup. So you could have a riders of many different styles with wanting many different feelings, and the bike was sort of malleable.
You could get there from
You could
that
get
point.
there, and other
Yeah.
motorcycles have had a very razor edge kind of setup. It works or it doesn't work at all. And it seemed like the GSX-R was such a great tool. And then you have all that support around it where you can call the guy and get like, oh, this shock really works. And that might not give you the edge to win, by doing something else the other people aren't doing, but you had a damn good race bike and you could go out
Yep.
and you could, if you could rely on your skills to get a long way on a bike that was broadly capable and easy to set up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and since that first model, now Suzuki did have a sort of dead in the water period after they went to water cooling. And I'm not sure how that came about, but those bikes, the early water cooled bikes, had all their power up high, and it took them a while to get the idea, rather like BMW with the S1000RR superbike, that the thing has to accelerate, in order to reach top speed. Top speed is great once you're there, but you have to get there
Yeah.
off every corner. And so they had a dark period, but without fail, every year that there were changes, the changes were to maintain the focus, keeping the wheelbase under control. They finally went to the vertically stacked gearbox shafts so that they could lengthen the swing arm. They constantly played with the steering head angle and rake as tires changed. They never let it gradually mush out into a sofa, which is a tendency in this game.
Yep.
Oh, well, we could sell more if we had a broader appeal. Yeah, let's paint it beige like those millions of computers. Fantastic. So, another thing that happened that came to my attention was in 1988 they shortened the stroke 4 millimeters. Now, this is a natural thing if you're building a power sports vehicle into a constantly changing and always a market with a permanent appetite for power. You've got to come up with it, and so you want to put bigger valves in so you can flow the air you need at a higher speed. And they did that. And son of a gun, that 44.7 millimeter stroke engine just couldn't get out of its own way off the bottom. And it took them, they struggled with that. And finally, they went back to the longer stroke. Now, the thing that happens here is that as you make the bore bigger and the stroke shorter, what you're compressing the fuel air mixture from, it starts out as more like a hockey puck and it ends up like a 45 RPM record. It's really thin and wide. And it's not a trivial thing to get the flame to travel in all parts of that and light it up quickly. Instead, it kind of crackles and makes a hissing noise. And,
Yeah.
like the log fire,
Wanders
and
across the chamber.
wanders across the chamber, losing heat at every millimeter. So it took them a while to get past that, but they did get past it. The team that has produced the GSX-Rs has never ceased to try to get there. They're motivated, and I've always appreciated that so much. And other companies put a lot of money into trying to win World Superbike. Suzuki has won the class on occasion. Ducati almost always wins it because it's their lifeblood. But as you mentioned when we were talking about this podcast, the huge number of GSX-Rs going to club races, collecting Suzuki contingency, buying parts. They claimed that the contingency program was more than paid for by the parts sales. And I remember one morning walking around the corner in the old Daytona, came to the end of a garage, and there was Reverend Kevin Rensell sitting in the back of his van with the doors open. He had a rack of carburetors in his lap, and he had a cup of coffee. And I thought, this is great. This is the life right here. And he looked up and he said, doesn't get any better than this. And that's the GSX-R story, really.
Yeah.
Because it brought high level motorcycling to so many people. It was a democratizing fleet of bicycles. It was grand.
Yeah.
And it is to this day.
Yeah. The 750 was such a, we saw sport bikes have basically for a long time, it was 600s and 750s and then V twins, of 1,000cc for racing. And 754s, having tested zillions of bikes over the years, 754 has always struck me as very close to like the perfect motorcycle for sporting intent.
Mm-hmm.
You had that agility that you get from the, lower rotating masses in the engine and all that stuff from a 600.
Yep.
And you get that kind of steering feel and agility. But
There's
just
some
that
weight
little
on the front wheel because the engine is a pancake.
Yep. And then a little extra kick and torque. And I had always deeply wished as the middleweight class started to grow that Suzuki would do an 800. I thought, man, that would just be an ideal balance, fast sport bike. But the 750, I mean, remarkable motorcycle. I think of everything I have tested, the 2000 GSX-R 750 stands out as I don't know, a shining moment, a hair-raising, incredible, affordable, repairable, raceable, rideable sport bike. It made 125, 127 at the rear wheel on our dyno.
Mm,
It got
that's an
more than,
accomplishment.
it got more than, if you were just kind of, rattling around, you were getting like 44 miles per gallon out of it. And it weighed 399 pounds from the factory.
Mm-hmm.
We drained the gas out, rolled it up on a scale, and it weighed under 400 pounds. And then the chassis setup and the geometry, everyone who rode that bike was just blown away. We took it, Paul Dean rode it to Laguna Seca up Coast Highway.
Yeah.
He roached the tires in one trip, just hammering it. And he came back and was just like, he'd never stopped talking about what it was like to ride that bike on the road up that highway.
Yeah.
We did a 3x3, a group of 3x3 comparison tests out at Pahrump, Spring Mountain Motorsports Park in the early days of it being open. It was basically like they call them permanent tents, and I'm not sure they're permanent, but they are tents. and it just had a tent and a pretty cool racetrack. And we took, it was RC51, that kind of era, RC51, and it wasn't the Suzuki, it was the Aprilia, and it was a Ducati. because the
Just
Pirelli,
after the turn of the century, yeah.
yeah, Melee was a twin. We took the twins, 1000cc twins, 1000cc four cylinders like CBR 929s or whatever, and then 600s. And then we're like, why don't we take this 750? So we had 10 bikes riding out to the racetrack. And as ever, we're doing a big street ride, and we ride them on the street out there. And when you're going up the 15, you kind of hook it north at the Mad Greek. We all stopped for dinner because it was time to eat. We all ate Greek food. And then it was dark, and we just wanted to get to Pahrump and pack a Mad Bikes. We just hit the gas, and I was at the front with another guy, headlights, high beam, side by side to get more light going. But we were doing 100 plus most of the way, 120, and we just rode up there. We did our track testing. And at the end of all that track testing, here's the GSX-R, and we're just like, that. All these things, they were great bikes. The variety is so wonderful, and 600s and torque from V twins, because just all of that variety. But everyone just sort of turned and looked at that bike parked by itself, and it's like, yeah, it does stand alone,
Yeah.
because it hits this beautiful target. And the funny part about that speeding through the night through the desert was that we did our track testing, and then we kind of motored back during the day, after we did our track testing.
Yeah.
And it was like a police camp out. They were doing an endurance run. There were 100 motorhomes filled with cops sleeping on the highway. And at 10 o'clock at 10 o'clock at night, we had no idea. The only reality was like our puddle of light ahead of us. We had no idea,
Yeah.
but I'm sure we woke up a lot of sheriffs who were angry, and we're sorry.
Yeah. Oh, yes, we're sorry.
Yes, we're sorry.
Sorry.
But at the same time that GSX-R750 was making that rear wheel horsepower, and with that kind of fuel economy, I had an MV Agusta F4 750 Brutale, so the 750 naked bike. And that 750 it was a sit-up bike, so it wasn't being super sporty, but it made 113 horse. I want to say 110 horsepower, but I could not get it to make fuel mileage. I called Araldo Faraci, because they were the importers at the time, and I was like,
sure.
I'm like, Araldo, where is it going? And he's like, I don't know. He talked about they changed the primary ratio to try to limit the top speed, and it made the deceleration very hard, and there were just some issues. They just didn't want the bike to go that fast. But I tried to tune it. I tried all these things to get the mileage out of it. And here was this GSX-R, making 15 more horsepower, easily 15 more horsepower, and making nearly double the fuel mileage out of it. The MV, I was lucky to get 24
Fabulous.
out of the MV. And it's just, man, and it's gone on. And now you can race the thing in super sport, and you can still race that bike. There's a home for it. Remarkable impact. And
racing had quite an influence on those motorcycles, because, of course, 600s became big sellers, and everybody wanted to have the lion's share of that class. And so the 600 races, they hired the best riders that they could and went at it. It was factory racing. And Miguel de Hamel is well known for his 600 accomplishments. But Suzuki soon had their 600 with a little short stroke spinning up to 16.5 and in the thick of it. And in the early days, people were saying, oh, well, the 600 is really a street bike, but the 750 has become a race bike. Well, it wasn't long before the 600 had joined the 750 in that less, unchain my heart aspect.
But it's what we wanted. I mean, when I say we, as the collective buying public, the people out there getting motorcycles, you want to know why 600s got so awesome, and why they invested so much, and why they put all that technology into a beginner bike, a little bike.
Yes.
It's because at the heyday of sport bike sales, 20,000 GSX-R 600s a year, more than 20,000. All the manufacturers were selling massive numbers of those bikes.
Yeah.
And then, leaders, the leader class came around, and buyers, certainly migrated to the leader class, and the GSX-R 1000. what an impact that bike made. And I think back to the last sort of naked, not digital gorilla superbike, GSX-R 1000 K5, the 2005 GSR long stroke. I think it's 70
Yeah.
plus millimeters. Freaking spectacular motor. And when you talked about having the short stroke 750 and they're struggling and whatever,
Yep.
I wonder if the guy working on the thousands, like, we're not going to have no torque here, buddy, and
Yeah.
making a chamber that they could light off,
Sure. Well,
Uh,
and we've all seen that Kawasaki stuck with that 55 millimeter stroke on their ZX-10 or R, whatever it is, in World Superbike, and it kept winning championships until I think officialdom decided, well, we're going to issue these guys a lower and lower rev limit until they stand down. But when it comes to standing up or standing down, I was very impressed by uh, the influence of two men on Suzuki when they had their time in the wilderness. And I remember that they would hire the young hotshot, and the rider would have a microphone shoved in his face after first practice, and he would say, well, this bike's got a lot of potential. Yeah, that's it. And I can't make a lap time on it, so, but it's this GSX-R, so I know that it must be me. And so the two men were Matt Mladen and Amar Bazaz. And Amar Bazaz was originally in atmospheric studies at UMass, and he answered an ad that said that Yosh wanted a computer guy, and he thought, why not? He applied. They gave him the job, and he said the first couple of weeks that he was there in the shop, he said, I saw that they had these sets of rear suspension linkage, and none of them was complete. You couldn't put a bike together because these parts are all squirreled away. So I made it my business to find them all, put them back in the places, and start figuring out how to use them. And Mladen's attitude was, well, if I'm not quick enough, I'm going to do more push-ups, more and more push-ups. And Amar showed him that by making little changes in setup, that he wouldn't have to finish the race second and just completely knackered. He could go to the party afterwards. And when they began to win races, Suzuki took notice. Oh, if we sent these guys some better parts, they might even be able to make them win races.
or
And so there was this fabulous era when those two men so dominated AMA Superbike that schemes were put in hand. Who will rid me of this disagreeable priest? And it was self-healing, actually, because along came Ben Spies. But it was a long era of GSX-R domination because Mladen could ride and Amar could give him something that he could really go well on.
well, what a team. I mean,
Yeah.
really one of the legendary teams in American racing. And, Matt had opportunities for Grand Prix and World Superbike. He even, he hopped on a Kajiva for a while.
Yeah.
But, once he got into a groove in America, he was making good money and he knew where all the tracks were, and they were only 3 time zones apart. There was no Malaysia, there was no Middle East, there was nothing, not getting kicked around the globe. And he's like, no, this is pretty good. It's a competitive series. I got a great team. And
Yeah.
he just kept on doing it, championship after championship.
And there was a time during which the other teams were sort of taking it easy. It was like Honda decided, well, we're not going to do HRC bikes anymore. We can just put a piece of abrasive paper over one finger and kind of rub it in the port, and that ought to be pretty good. And it wasn't. And Yamaha put a tremendous amount of effort into winning Daytona because their marketing people knew what a motivator that was. But then they'd look in the accounts, and there wasn't a lot there to support R&D for the rest of the season. And so that left the field to Suzuki pretty thoroughly. And they went on like that, and I think there were people that were bored by it, or they thought it was unfair or something. But it was just that Suzuki had a professional racing team.
Yeah.
That was supported by normal factory R&D. And the others were sort of soft pedaling that because I guess they had budgetary problems or something. And so that was a grand era for Mladen, Amar, and the GSX-R.
Yeah. And
I think of course, yes.
Well, I think it remains, those bikes remain the flexible tools that they've always been. And it's so interesting to see the evolution of the market now with GSX 8Ss, which there's one right there. That's an 8R, excuse me. Race street bike, they're racing them successfully, and they're fun and they're great. It's just a different proposition from a focused inline four, and different than, and it's not called the GSX-R 8.
Yeah.
It's a GSX-S 8R.
Well,
and that's a very important distinction for Suzuki.
We've talked about the reasons for doing these twins, and they're absolutely cogent reasons. On the one hand, a large number of Americans learned to ride those high revving inline fours with a lot of power up high. And going fast on something like that requires a close marriage of your foot with the gearbox. And it's an acquired skill, and people who have it are justly proud of it. But it may be actually easier for a rider of today to go quickly around a racetrack or any familiar piece of road on the twin, because it is being given that wonderful Mesa torque line. It's just a flat table. And there's a good reason for that, because emissions have required them to shorten the overlap period so that the intake and exhaust valves aren't open together, so that the intake can whisper to the exhaust and it goes out to Ann Arbor, where the EPA goes, I smell something.
Yep.
And so when you shorten up the intake like that, or the overlap like that, how do you get the power back? You increase the valve lift, and the overall timing is shorter. So now you've got a lot of valve acceleration. But because everyone's been playing the racing game, they know how to control valves at those high accelerations. So those twins benefit that way, and they deliver a very rideable torque curve to the rider.
They're great street motors. They really are. And I mean, they're fun at the track too. It's just a different proposition.
And the other thing that's important is if you measure the distance around each piston and multiply it by the number of pistons, that is the seal length, the length to be sealed by piston rings. On a twin, it's much shorter than on a four of the same displacement. And that length is where a lot of unburned hydrocarbons come from, because as the piston comes up on compression, some of that mixture is shoved into the piston ring crevice space. And then when the spark lights it off and the pressure rises rapidly, it pushes even more in, because, of course, the cylinder wall is the farthest from the spark plug. So this is a way to make a high-performance motorcycle that is rideable by so many people that meets Euro pick one.
Yep.
5 plus X.
And they're keeping the bores moderate as well. So
yes, they are.
Not only is there fewer cylinders, but you're not going with a 116 millimeter bore. you know?
Yes, to the little
Yeah.
63 or
Yeah.
66 millimeter stroke. Yeah,
Yeah. So,
short guy. So it's been a great ride with the GSX-Rs because they accomplished all these tremendous things, and they made a lot of Americans into really good motorcyclists, I think, because they had something on which they could learn that didn't cost an arm and a leg. The old rule in club racing used to be, don't race anything you can't afford to crash. Because, and of course, if you're a track day guy and you bring all your carbon fiber and titanium up there and then throw the
yeah.
thing away, it's easy to be out 10 grand.
Well, being in this position of testing a lot of exotic motorcycles for a very long time,
Yes.
the stress that you feel getting on a titanium framed NCR Ducati, like a Milona, which is their kind of race bike.
Yeah.
It was a 944, I think, high revving titanium. It was Poggio Polini and NCR, like making everything possible out of titanium.
Poggi Polini, yes.
Oh God, it was great. But you go out on a bike like that, and I'm like, I think we're doing 86%, 90. Okay, we'll go a little faster, but for a very short period of time. Let's see what
Yeah.
happens. Let's see how it goes. Let's get some information from as fast as we can go. But you get out on a GSX-R, you're like, they'll make more of them, and
Yeah, sure.
you're going with it. I
Yeah.
remember one story that stands out, one experience that stands out was 2004. They were refreshing the 750 and the 600. And I did a story called The Last Samurai, and we went to Ryuyo in Japan,
Ah,
the legendary Suzuki test track. Kevin Schwantz was there, and he drove us around, bolstering our confidence in someone who had crashed here and high-sided and then drowned in the lake because there was like a water feature. Watch
yes.
out for the crosswind. The back straight, you were in sixth gear. It seemed like for 7 minutes. You'd come off
Yeah.
this second gear corner, pretty tight right, and then you were just upshifting, and you got into sixth, and you were there forever until you braked for the next corner.
That's a sea
And
breeze there.
yeah,
Yeah.
and well, there was a gap, and I'm a bigger guy, and I was like probably 210 at the time, and I'm against all these little road race dudes, and I'm drafting them up the front straight because it was long enough you could really get a good draft going, and you're closing in, and then you'd hit that opening, and the wind would push the little guy to the side, and then I'd hit it. I wouldn't move quite as much, and
Yeah.
I'd lose my draft. But
Yep.
remarkable track, and riding the bike on that track, having the confidence, like you get on if you've ridden a lot of the bikes, you get on a GSX-R and you're like, oh yeah, this makes perfect sense to me. And a terrifying track, really, for going fast anyway. I mean, a race pace. You go up the front straight where they had the tent set up and all the engineers, Mr. EO, who was the project leader on the 750. And I asked him what his first job at Suzuki was. And he says, oh, I designed brake levers, just brake levers.
Just brake levers.
I was pretty cool that guy had gone through the ranks like that and
Yeah.
was now leading the GSX-R 750. So you go up by the tents on the front straight, and there was like a little chicane that was left, right, as I recall, and you'd be in fifth gear, and as soon as you dip it for the chicane, it would hit the rev limiter because you're reducing the diameter of the tire on
Yeah.
the side. So you go, and you're like, and then you get in and you click into fourth and you throw it into this right-hander, and there was like a corner of a factory. So there's like guardrail, it seemed like, and then the corner of the building like stuck out.
Yeah.
And they had some like old wrestling mats like taped up on it. It would be the end if you lost the front there. You
Sure.
just had to really have confidence to turn it in. And but the familiarity that they were reliable. The chassis was reliable. You got on it and you knew what you were dealing with. And this was the era then, because this is when things were really changing. And we were thinking like, maybe they're not going to make a 750 because they had the 600 and the 1000. And they're like, where does the 750 belong? And I asked all those guys, I said, well, you're making a GSX-R 750,
There's no race for it. Yeah.
what's it for? And they said, well, I said, I thought sales would go down. And he said, well, we did predict that sales would go down. And they did, but not nearly as much as we thought. So there was still a real market for the bike. And
Yeah.
so they kept making it. And in the earlier days, it was like, oh, let's build the 750. We need a 600, and saving costs and R&D, they would do a lot of that work, and then they'd put the 600 motor essentially in sort of a 750-ish chassis, and it was all very similar, some shared components and everything. And then the development leader really became the 600 because that's what was,
Driving. It had the
driving
money
it.
behind it. Yeah.
Yeah, and they wanted the compactness and the lightness, and so they, built the 750 out of the 600, basically, to put it bluntly.
Yeah. When I went to Rio, there were all those wind turbines, which always look slightly menacing. They're moving so slowly. What do they want? They seem like strange beings, but those, I don't know where the motorcycle's going. For a while, I was fearful that the EPA would just say, "Oh, well, look at these statistics. We're not going to allow anything like this." But I think that with recent surprises, political surprises, they've got more respect for the desires of ordinary folks. There are people in Iowa who ride motorcycles, and so I think the twins are progressive in the sense that they are a good performing motorcycle that has a nice stiff chassis, so they don't have a lot of steering delay. You don't feel like I made a motion and now I'm going to check my watch and now I'm starting to steer. So I think that the late model twins are some of the finest motorcycles that have ever been built. But we have nostalgia for Kevin Renzel in that back of his van with those carburetors on his knees. Those guys were GSX-R gypsies. They made their living by going from one club race to another and collecting Suzuki contingency. It was a life.
No, amazing. What an impact.
Yeah.
So, yeah, GSX-R750 and everything that grew out of it, very much feeling like the soul of Suzuki.
Yes.
And, we'll ask Suzuki to think about making a highly exotic upmarket version, low production volume, handmade.
Yes.
Just go ahead and make it 1,000. I want that 800. I want a perfect inline 4-cylinder balanced 800 tons of power. I know the market wouldn't want that as much as 1,000. So you have my permission to make it 1,000. But I would love to see Suzuki do basically. There was the GSX-R750, and then there was the Limited, and the Limited had enhanced brakes and some other components. And wouldn't it be cool to make a GSX-R 1000 Limited, an evocation of the past?
Yeah.
And then, get the race kit, get the compression knock up, get the accessory race exhaust from the factory, from the dealer. Man, get working on it, team. All right. Well, that's it for today, folks. The legendary GSX-R model line 750, particularly standing out in my memory of testing everything. If you like what we're doing, get down there and click the like button. We love your comments. Love reading the comments and love seeing who's making them. Subscribe if you're on Spotify, Apple. Go ahead and rate us if you like us. Don't rate us if you don't like us. Could love it. We'd love a little boost over on the auditory platforms. And we're really enjoying your company here on YouTube. And we'll see you next time. Thanks for listening.